probably time I got around to this, because there's literally a week left before Infinity War comes out, and I've got 6 films to get through before then, plus a trip to Inverell to visit a bunch of people over the weekend. So making videos is going to be sort of a cut and run sort of deal. Hopefully I'll be able to upload one each day and we'll manage to get through it, but even so, with a 6-hour drive tomorrow, another one on Monday to come back home, work on the Tuesday immediately after I get back, and then the movie itself on Wednesday, there's not a lot of space in there with meeting everybody and hanging out with people I need to and want to hang out with to actually make videos. So we're going to see how this goes. The settings may change because I may have to film on the go or at someone else's place or whatever, but anyway, we are here. We have the Civil War Easter eggs, so let's get straight into them. Okay, so the first one is actually a Spider-Man Homecoming sort of reference in the code used to gain access to the Winter Soldier's bunker. The code used is 17826, which, if you sort of reverse them around, makes the Spider-Man Homecoming release date of the 28th of the 6th, 17. Obviously, I'm using the Australian version of saying dates because you use the day first and then incrementally get bigger, whereas the code reversed, except for the first 2 numbers, is the American version, where they put the month first for whatever reason. We get a very short shot of Bucky's Winter Soldier mask in the breathing apparatus that they use on him in the cryo chamber as it's lifting up off him. This is not seen for the rest of the film, and it's reminiscent of the one he wore in Winter Soldier when he was concealing his identity from Steve. We then come up to probably the greatest and like most well-known Easter egg of this entire film, and that is the words that activate Bucky into being the Winter Soldier. Each of these words has a different meaning that pertains to a different element of the story or his character, and I am here to break them down for you. So longing is his emotional state. I did a lot of research, had a look at a couple of different websites, ideas for what these meant. The most common one was his emotional state, whether it's his longing to go back to before falling off the freight car and being just Bucky fighting alongside his best friend for the US Army, or for a time after his brainwashing when he's again free. Either way you look at it, longing is his emotional state. The next one is rusted, which apparently had no meaning. Most people thought it may have pertained to his metal arm, but that is not the case, because a lot of people were like, maybe, and then put question marks at the end. But I went onto dictionary.com like a genius that I am and found that number 4 definition for the word rusted, and I am paraphrasing here, is any influence or agency tending to injure or impair the mind, character, or usefulness, which is exactly what's happening to him at that point in time, with him being brainwashed by Hydra. I'll let you fit those in where they do to see how it relates to him so well. The next word is furnace. This is commonly believed to be the warming up, as furnaces do to places and things. They warm them up. For Bucky from his cryo sleep where he was frozen, warming him up for his next mission. The next word is daybreak. This one's sort of a double-edged sword. The first side of it is it's Bucky's rebirth and the new day of his life as the Winter Soldier, but at the same time, on a grander scale for the movie, it's a new age for superheroes having to now live with the Accords. So it's both a Bucky reference and a Civil War reference. The next one is 17, which is obviously the year of his birth, being 1917. The numbers 1 and 9 are also in this, but I have found different meanings that I think better suit them as far as it goes with the rest of the words, but they can also be put together to make 1917. The next one is benign, which basically means something that's favourable, or I think another definition of it was kind or something along those lines. But basically it's Bucky's state of being when he's either in cryosleep, being benign, or when he's being used as the Winter Soldier and therefore he is favourable to Hydra. In both those scenarios, because when he's in cryosleep, the brainwashing is not in effect, and when he's Winter Soldier, it is. So either way, they're winning, and he is benign. The next one is the number 9, which, as I said before, could be used in conjunction with the other numbers to make a date, but is also, funnily enough, the number of heads on the mythological Hydra, and it is, after all, the fictional agency Hydra brainwashing him. So it could be a reference to Hydra itself. The next one is Homecoming, which is obviously the Spider-Man subtitle for his movie that was upcoming at the time. And the reason that there were a lot of Spider-Man references in this, obviously, is because he first appeared in this as part of the MCU. So it was a big thing, and people wanted to let everyone know. And so at the time, the Homecoming Easter egg could have been a bit of a teaser for what's to come. I will also refer back to this word of homecoming / coming home later on, as it pertains to a couple other characters and people. The number 1, second last word, again, could be used as part of the date, but could also be referred to as being Bucky himself. The date in question that we see him being brainwashed, he actually takes some super soldier serum, and they then use that to create a super soldier army, I guess, with the kill squad that they bring in. Obviously that doesn't work out at all the way they wanted it to, but they still would have referred to Bucky as Winter Soldier 1, and then the others being Winter Soldiers 2 through 6, or however many there were. So that's what I think 1 is. I think it is his designated number. And then of course the last one is Freight Car, and this is where Bucky died, and I believe this word is at the end because it signifies that as of that moment, Bucky is dead, and he is wholeheartedly the Winter Soldier. The next reference is literally the next shot, where we get to see the Soviet soldier's face. That actor was also in X-Men First Class. He was also a Soviet soldier in that, on the boat during the Cuban Missile Crisis scene where Magneto pulls the submarine out of the water. He was on that boat as one of the Soviets, and in this movie he's playing Colonel Vasily Karpov, and I don't think it's too far of a stretch, considering that they're both Russian characters, that it could be the same Russian character, considering that Deadpool has a lot of MCU references in it as well, and it's part of the wider X-Men continuity, etc. So I don't think that it's too far to imagine that that could have been deliberate. Maybe Marvel's trying to tell us that, hey, things are coming in a not so subtle way, because he's literally only got a cameo in both universes. Who knows? Now, the next one is the Crossbones armor that we see in Lagos. Originally, we only see the cross across his chest because he's wearing a mask, like a gas mask over his actual mask. He later takes that off to show us the skull mask. While being chased through the little marketplace, one of the mercenaries threatens to drop the biological weapon. That actor actually played Thanos as his cameo in the Avengers when he was first teased. So that's kind of cool that they brought him back in as they were starting the phase that would sort of end with Infinity War, to help bring things full circle, which is really nice. Red Wing then sort of shoots him. In the comics, Red Wing is an actual Falcon with a telepathic link to Sam Wilson. In this, it's a drone that can be controlled by a thing on his arm, which is... in the comics, the Stanford incident is when a character blows himself up and causes a high casualty rate, while also being sort of filmed because the superheroes wanted the world to see them catch the bad guy, and then the bad guy doesn't get caught, and it causes them to bring in the Superhero Registration Act, which is exactly what happens here, except for the fact that it's the Avengers, so the world's watching them because of Sokovia in New York. And instead of it being a school, it's a hospital, and instead of it being Nitro, whose actual power is to blow himself up and reconstitute his atoms, it's Crossbones, and he's literally just making a last-ditch revenge effort, I guess. So either way, there is still the same sort of inciting incident for what happens next. The next scene takes place at MIT with Tony Stark giving his little flashback thing and then talking about the September Foundation. If you remember from the first Iron Man film that started it all off, Iron Man or Tony Stark is said to have graduated from MIT himself, so this is a homecoming of sorts for him, and his character to back where he sort of started, I guess. We then get a cameo from Jim Rash playing a character similar to his Community character of Dean Pelton. And then we go sort of further backstage, and Alfred Woodard is there as Miriam Sharp. She does also play Mariah Dillard in the Luke Cage series, and I have a whole theory on that. I'll probably make another video about it. But I believe they're the same character. And like I said, I'll go more in depth into that in a separate video. We then get to see William Hurt's Thaddeus Ross, which we haven't seen since The Incredible Hulk back in 2008. He shows us the images of New York, Washington DC, Sokovia and Lagos, all of which are incidences involving either the Avengers or Captain America specifically, because the only other Avengers sitting at the table at the time that were involved in Washington DC were Falcon and Black Widow, and neither of those is a title character like Iron Man or Thor. And that just sort of helps bring it home that this is, in actual fact, not an Avengers 2.5 or whatever, but a Captain America story. The map also has a couple of other little dots on it. There's one in California, which could relate to Ant-Man or Tony Stark, since both of their things take place somewhere in California. There's one in Brazil, which could relate to the incident that happened in the Hulk at the factory, considering that also involved Thaddeus Ross. There's one in Egypt, which, being the second reference to something happening in Egypt in the Captain America film, feels like they're definitely trying to get us to look at Moon Knight a little bit closely, just in case they decide to do something with him, which I certainly hope they do. Again, another story for another time. There's one in Russia which could be the Red Room, but is, in all honesty, probably not. It's on the border with China, so I have no idea what that could be. There's one in sort of the middle of China, which again I have no idea about. And then there's one in Adelaide, which could pertain to Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., but as that's about as far as I know with that reference, I can't divulge more information on that. We get a nod to Ragnarok when Thaddeus asks Steve where Thor and Banner are. Later on, Sam is complaining about how the government is lowjacking them. Lowjacking is a form of it's like a car tracking system that the police use to find stolen vehicles and that sort of thing. Throughout the film, Vision wears regular clothes and even at one point plays chess, which are things that he does in the comics as well. The funeral speech comes from the comics, and in the comics it was spoken by Captain America himself, and he says it to Spider-Man. In this, it's Agent 13 saying it as a recollection of something that Peggy has said while Steve is present at her funeral. But in both cases, the speech still comes from... I've forgotten the author's name. I think it's Mark Twain, if I remember correctly. Could be Mark Twain, and it's an actual speech that you can look up. After the UN gets bombed, there is a news article that says at least 12 are dead, including Wakanda's King T'Chaka. This is obviously our number 12 reference. Later on, T'Challa's talking about Bast and Sekhmet when he's talking about the afterlife. Bast and Sekhmet are both Egyptian goddesses. They are both warrior goddesses, and they both have cat-like faces. Bast has a black cat's or black panther's face, and Sekhmet has a lioness's face, which I feel could be a reference to the Dora Milaje, who also show up in this film. From this point on, the first time we then see any of the other male members of Team Cap, except for the ones that sort of get brought in later. All the characters that have been Captain America in the comics at some point are all wearing actual caps, which sort of spawned an internet meme where they're like, I understand why they're called Team Cap now. The irony with this is that Steve Rogers is wearing a dark blue one. Sam Wilson is wearing a sort of maroony red one, and Bucky Barnes is wearing a black one, which are the actual colours of their uniforms that they wear in the film. Just in case you couldn't tell the difference between a blonde person, someone with long hair, and someone of an African American descent. When we go to Bucharest, this is also a homecoming of sorts for the actor, not the character. Sebastian Stan was actually born in Romania, and Bucharest is its capital. And speaking of Bucky, he's finally caught after the big chase through Bucharest or Berlin or wherever that chase takes place. I'm still not entirely sure. He's put into a holding cell that's labelled D23, which is the official Disney fan club. We then, for the first time, meet Everett Ross, and it's unclear whether this character is supposed to be related to Thaddeus Ross, who also shows up. Both work for the government. Ross isn't exactly, that uncommon of a name, so they're probably not. But it's still kind of confusing I guess, to general audiences to introduce two characters with the last name Ross. So I have a little theory that they could be related as like cousins or something. While talking to Cap and trying to convince him to sign the Accords, Tony shows him some pens that he pulled out of his father's archives and said that it felt timely. Timely Comics is the name of the original name of the company that later becomes Marvel Comics that we know today. I have a little theory about when Black Widow says you could at least recognize me to Bucky, who is clearly under the influence of the Winter Soldier mind control. Whether this is simply a reference to the movie Winter Soldier, where they would have met, or to something further back, since they are both Russian operatives from long ago that have been turned to the good side. I don't know. I will go into a little bit more depth in that in another video as well. So at least I'm giving myself something to do. The Super Soldier Serum is obviously used in this film as well. We know it's a Super Soldier Serum because A, it is blue, which we know is the colour of the serum in the MCU. 2, it does exactly what it's supposed to do, hurt like a bitch, and then transform every part of the person's being into a heightened state. So their strength increases, their speed increases, their agility increases, but so does their personality. And since it was given to a kill squad, their instinct to kill is heightened, which is why they start that big riot in the training room. At least that's my theory. I also have another theory about what sides of the fight Hulk and Thor would be on. Thor would undoubtedly be Team Cap, because he would want to be able to just come to Earth, do what he needs to do, and then return to Asgard. He wouldn't want to be hindered by Earth's government if he needed to stop a potentially galactic catastrophe like what happens in Dark World. If Civil War had happened before Dark World, that could have been a completely different movie, with the government turning up, trying to stop him from stopping Malekith, and it would have just gone all sideways. So Thor would undoubtedly be Team Cap against the registration. Hulk, on the other hand, I think would sort of sit on the fence about it. On the one hand, saying no to being a government test dummy, slash being sort of owned by the government in the way that pro-registration would go, has been something that he's been running from for a while. But on the other hand, so sort of that side of him would go anti-registration. He wouldn't want to be part of the Accords because he'd not want to be owned. But then on the other hand, the pro-registration side of him would be that at least then he would know when they deem it appropriate for a code green, which we see him do in Age of Ultron. So he sort of sits on the fence for me. He really could go either way. And I think that's why Black Widow says, do you really think he'd be on our team? And I believe that line was put in deliberately to make fans question where they think the other Avengers would actually go in this film. When we first meet Peter Parker, he's wearing a pizza shirt that is white and red, the same colours as Joe's Pizza from Spider-Man 2, where Peter Parker works. And this is also the first time that, this scene is also the first time that Robert Downey Jr. and Marissa Tomei have worked together since the film Only You, which was in the 90s or something. The two sort of shots that we get shown by Tony when he's talking to Peter in his room are of him Spider-Man, stopping a car thief and a bus crash, both of which are things that he does in the Amazing Spider-Man films, albeit in different ways. And this was to sort of recall that we already know Spider-Man's origins because look, we know that he's done these things. The car thief is the one where the thief breaks into the car and Spider-Man is just magically sitting in the back seat, and it ends with him having to run away from the cops. And the bus crash is the beginning of Amazing Spider-Man 2, where he is fighting Alexei Setsevich, being the Rhino. We also get a paraphrased, with great power comes great responsibility, because even Marvel doesn't want to recall the fact that it was actually said in a Spider-Man film. Again, the Dora Milaje show up later on as well, as I mentioned before. Agent 13 kisses Cap, and the reason that this is a reference at all is not because Agent 13 is Peggy's niece, and it technically means that Steve is or has dated two members of the same family. But it is a reference because in the comics, Agent 13 pretends to kiss Cap so that she can shoot him to end the Civil War. In fact, I believe that issue was called The Death of Captain America. Could be wrong. There is an Ant-Man callback when Scott Lang is talking to Sam Wilson, and he says, "Hey, about last time," and then Sam interjects and says, "It was a good audition, but it won't happen again." That's in reference to the fight scene that they had at the Avengers facility. And I find it really weird that they're doing it in front of Cap, considering Sam explicitly said through his communicator to whoever was on the other end, "Let's never have Cap find out about this." Cap just found out about it from you. We then get the webbed shield, which happens in the comics, although in the comics it's not only taken from him, but webbed to a wall somewhere so that he can't retrieve it. Both sides of this argument have some reformed villains. The Team Iron Man side has Vision and Black Widow. In the comics, they were villains, and in the MCU, I feel like Black Widow was also a villain of sorts, which is why Hawkeye was sent to kill her. And on the Team Cap side, everyone except Captain America and Falcon have been a villain at some point. So Hawkeye was a villain to Iron Man before reforming and becoming a hero. Scarlet Witch was a member of the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants with her brother Quicksilver and her father Magneto. Ant-Man is a thief and criminal in both versions of himself, and Winter Soldier obviously was the villain of Captain America Winter Soldier. Later, when Sam asks, "Is this stuff coming out of you?" this is a reference to the Sam Raimi trilogy of Spider-Man films, which was not true to the comics at all in how Spider-Man's webbing is created, and I believe why Sony decided to make sure that they gave an in-depth look at him actually creating some spider webbing in The Amazing Spider-Man, because he does actually have web shooters and doesn't come out of him. During the airport scene, the outside of the airport scene, in the background you can see the Arrested Development Bluth stair car. I can't recall exactly where, but if you want to go watch that scene, I guarantee you will find it. We then get the live action version of the Avengers number 223 cover with Ant-Man on Hawkeye's arrow, and then of course later on in the scene when it's ending we get Giant Man, which in and of itself is a reference, because obviously he's still Ant-Man but he grows big, and the character would still be called Ant-Man technically, I guess, for the MCU. because they wouldn't want to confuse general viewers. And then later on we also have Spider-Man being demasked of sorts when it sort of comes halfway up his face after he gets basically backhanded by a giant Scott. We then get Joe Russo in his second cameo in a Captain America film, this time as the psychiatrist? Yeah, Theo Broussard, the one that was supposed to question Bucky instead of Zemo. And this could also, in turn, be a reference to the producer, Steve Broussard, who worked on a couple of the films as well. He worked on Captain America First Avenger, Iron Man 3, The One Shot, All Hail the King, and a couple other ones. When Friday asks, "What do I look like?" and Tony retorts, "I don't know, I was thinking a redhead." This is sort of true. In the comics, she gets a holographic form that's sort of in a pinky shade. So technically she would be a redhead, but also it's a call to Pepper Potts, who is actually a redhead, in both the comics and the film. We then see Baron Zemo chip away at the ice to get to the panel to open up the bunker so that he can get in. Now, remembering that the code that was originally put in was 17826, the code Zemo puts in is different. He puts in 71862. They are the same numbers, just in the wrong order. So I have a theory that as long as you have the same 5 numbers in generally the same order, you could potentially still gain access. However, this is not a viable security measure because you're literally having like half your options or something open, I guess. If each number can only be used once, you've got half your numbers as viable solutions to get in. We then get to see the raft, which it serves as Prison 42. In the comics, Prison 42 is where they store all the anti-registration heroes and villains, because even villains needed to register, which doesn't seem like a thing villains would do at all, because they're criminals. But yeah, so I sort of think that in the MCU, it is Prison 42 with the designated name of the Raft. We then hear the Futurist while Hawkeye is mocking Tony Stark. The Futurist is actually something that he refers to himself as in the comics. When Tony says Cap is off the reservation, this sort of, to me, feels like a reference to the, I think it's the 1692. I think it's 1692. Could be 18. I can't remember entirely. But there is a separate like universe storyline that they did, where it was sort of like a what if thing. In this, Captain America is sent back in time by some device, and sort of reappears in sort of like, I think it's 1692, in sort of like Victorian era times. Obviously the stark difference in culture changes him to be, he sort of becomes like a nomadic Indian sort of thing and calls himself Rogers, Rojhaz, and therefore would be off the reservation because Native American Indians live on reservations these days. So I kind of feel like that's a reference to that, and it's probably the closest to anything from that storyline we're ever going to get. As they're getting off the Quinjet in Siberia, Steve and Bucky are having some banter, and they mention a girl named Dot. This could be a reference to Dottie Underwood from Agent Carter, and could potentially mean that she was in New York for a lot longer than just what the show shows us, and that she may have in fact had a bit of a fling with Bucky Barnes. Considering that he was joining up for the military at the beginning, this could have been her sort of way in to infiltrate the US Army, and therefore still maintain her ability to be a Russian operative. At the same time, it could just be any other person that he nicknamed Dot. The armor that Tony is wearing in the final fight is the Bleeding Edge armor. The Manchurian Candidate line that he says, Manchurian Candidate was a film about an unsuspecting man who is brainwashed into becoming an assassin, hence why it's used in regards to Bucky. The fight here also feels like the same thing happens, and sort of the same sort of ailment befalls it as befalls Batman vs Superman, and that is the hero versus hero of 2016 film having mummy issues, because this one is started off with he killed my mother, and the other one, their mums share a name. So either way, the only thing that could have made it worse is if Tony Stark's mum was named Martha and not Maria. Bucky loses another arm, continuing the reference of someone losing a hand or an arm throughout the films and continuing on. We get the Civil War cover image when Tony tries using his repulsor beams and Cap holds up his shield. That is from part 6 of the Civil War storyline, which had 6 parts. In the comic, Iron Man also analyzes Steve's fight patterns to beat him. Steve says, "I could do this all day," which references the same thing that he said multiple times in the first Avenger. When he drops the shield, he becomes the character Nomad. This has, since I've written this, been confirmed. Otherwise, this is going to just be a theory. The post-Civil War Bleeding Edge prosthetics are given to Rhodey. They have the same look as the Bleeding Edge armor, and this could be Rhodey's transition into becoming the cyborg-esque character that he becomes in the comics. We'll still have to wait and see. We get Stan Lee's cameo as a FedEx driver, which he then talks about in Guardians of the Galaxy. We go to Wakanda and we get to see the giant panther statue, which actually they have in the comics, big statues of panthers as well. When talking to Aunt May, Peter says that the guy who beat him up's name was Steve. Aunt May then replies, "Steve from 12C," another reference to the number 12 in this, and in a after credit scene of all places. And then of course we finish it off with the spider signal, which was actually from the comics as well, being shown as being something that Tony Stark has given Peter so that he can continue being Spider-Man. And that's it. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up. Don't forget to leave me a comment down below. Subscribe, all that other good stuff. And until next time, probably tomorrow, keep raising hell.